What if the life you are living right now is responding less to your effort and more to the signal you keep sending without realizing it? Most people are taught to look at reality as something fixed, external, and separate from them. They believe circumstances arrive first, and only then do thoughts, emotions, and actions follow. But what if that sequence is incomplete? What if reality is not only something you observe, but something you participate in through attention, emotion, expectation, and inner coherence? This is where everything begins to shift. Your mind is not just a place where thoughts happen. It is a field of interpretation, projection, and repetition. And whatever you repeat internally with enough feeling begins to shape your perception, your decisions, your energy, and eventually your results. That is why two people can stand in the same world and experience completely different lives. They are not seeing through the same internal lens. They are not broadcasting the same assumptions. They are not emotionally rehearsing the same future. So here is the deeper question. Are you creating your reality by design or reinforcing it by default? Because the truth is, your inner world is never silent. It is always declaring something, through fear or trust, through doubt or expectancy, through resistance or alignment. And the most powerful part is this. Reality often organizes itself around what feels most real to you, not merely around what you say you want. So before we go any further, ask yourself honestly, what future have you been emotionally practicing in secret? Have you ever wondered why the same types of situations seem to repeat in your life, even when you sincerely want something different? You change strategies, you try harder, you promise yourself that this time things will be different, and yet, somehow, the pattern quietly returns. The same financial pressure, the same relationship dynamics, the same feeling of almost getting there but not quite. Why does this happen? To understand this, we need to look at the hidden engine that shapes much of human behavior, the subconscious mind. Think of your conscious mind as the navigator of a ship. It decides directions, sets goals, and gives instructions. But the true movement of the vessel does not happen on the deck. It happens deep below in the engine room. And that engine room represents your subconscious mind. The subconscious does not analyze, debate, or question instructions. Its role is execution. It takes the most dominant ideas, images, and emotional patterns that you repeat internally and turns them into behavioral impulses, perceptions, and reactions. In other words, it organizes your actions and attention to match what it believes to be true. This is why effort alone is often not enough. If your conscious mind says, "I want abundance," but your deeper programming carries images of struggle, insecurity, or limitation, the engine room will continue steering the ship according to the stronger signal. And here is the key principle. The subconscious mind accepts the dominant idea without argument. Not the idea you occasionally repeat, but the one you emotionally rehearse the most. So now the real question emerges. What instruction has your inner captain been giving again and again, without noticing it? If this idea is already expanding the way you see your own mind, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps this message reach more people who are ready to transform their inner reality. And it also tells the algorithm that this kind of knowledge matters. Have you ever noticed how the mind tends to hold on to the very images you are trying to avoid? Someone says, "I can't lose this job." Another repeats, "I must not run out of money." A person in a fragile relationship keeps thinking, "This cannot fall apart." At first glance, these statements seem logical. They sound like caution, responsibility, or even determination. But beneath the surface, something very different is happening. Your subconscious mind does not process language the way the conscious mind does. It does not analyze grammar, detect irony, or interpret negation. Instead, it responds primarily to images and emotional impressions. It captures the central picture behind your thoughts. So when someone repeatedly thinks, "I must not lose my job," the subconscious does not focus on the word not. It registers the image of losing the job. When someone fears running out of money, the dominant mental picture becomes scarcity. And when that image is repeated with emotional intensity, especially fear, it gradually becomes the dominant internal signal. This is why fear can be such a powerful creative force. Not because fear is mystical or supernatural, but because it concentrates attention. It rehearses a scenario internally again and again. And the subconscious, acting like an obedient executor, begins organizing perception, behavior, and decisions around that internal rehearsal. Suddenly, opportunities are overlooked. Confidence weakens. Reactions change. Choices become defensive instead of expansive. The external result may look like bad luck or coincidence, but often it is the natural consequence of an image that was practiced internally for too long. So, here is a question worth sitting with. What mental picture has your mind been protecting by trying so hard to avoid it? What if the most powerful language shaping your reality is not the words you speak, but the images you quietly carry in your mind? Most people believe that thinking is primarily verbal. They assume the mind operates through sentences, arguments, and logical reasoning. But when we look deeper into how the subconscious actually functions, we discover something very different. The subconscious communicates through images, sensations, and emotional impressions. In other words, it responds far more strongly to what you picture than to what you merely say. Imagine telling yourself, "I want to succeed," while constantly visualizing failure, rejection, or struggle. Which signal do you think the subconscious will follow? The spoken sentence or the emotional image repeated behind it? The subconscious always prioritizes the image. Think about how memory works. When you recall an important moment from your past, you rarely remember it as a paragraph of words. Instead, your mind brings back scenes, faces, environments, tones of voice, physical sensations. These mental pictures are the language through which your deeper mind stores experience. And the same mechanism works when you imagine the future. Every time you picture yourself struggling, being rejected, or lacking resources, your subconscious registers that scenario as a familiar pattern. Over time, it begins guiding perception and behavior in ways that keep that image consistent with your actions. But here is the empowering part. The same mechanism that reinforces limitation can also create transformation. Because if images are the language of the subconscious, then the question becomes incredibly powerful. What images have you been rehearsing about the life that is still ahead of you? Where did the beliefs shaping your life actually come from? Most people assume their thoughts are entirely their own. They believe their fears, expectations, and limitations are simply realistic conclusions drawn from experience. But if you pause for a moment and look more carefully, you may discover something surprising. Many of the beliefs guiding your decisions were installed long before you were old enough to question them. During childhood, the subconscious mind is extremely receptive. It absorbs information from the environment like fertile soil receiving seeds. Family conversations, emotional experiences, cultural messages, and repeated observations all become part of the internal programming that later feels like common sense. If a child repeatedly hears that money is difficult to earn, that successful people are greedy, or that life is mostly a struggle, those impressions do not remain as simple memories. They gradually form subconscious expectations about how the world works. The same process occurs with relationships, self-worth, opportunity, and even the perceived limits of what is possible. By adulthood, these internal programs feel so natural that most people never question them. They assume their reactions are simply who they are. But here is the critical insight. Many of these beliefs were never consciously chosen. They were absorbed. And once a belief is stored in the subconscious, it quietly begins influencing perception and behavior. It filters opportunities, shapes decisions, and reinforces patterns that appear to confirm the original program. This is why two individuals with similar skills and opportunities can move in completely different directions in life. So, here is a question worth asking yourself with honesty. Which of your current beliefs are truly yours, and which ones were simply inherited without your awareness? Why do some people unknowingly recreate the same limitations, even when new opportunities appear in front of them? At first glance, it seems irrational. A person wants financial freedom, yet they hesitate when a promising opportunity arises. Someone longs for a stable relationship, yet repeatedly chooses partners who reinforce instability. From the outside, it may look like poor judgment or bad luck. But beneath the surface, something much deeper is operating. The subconscious mind has a powerful tendency to protect what feels familiar. Even when a familiar pattern is uncomfortable or limiting, it still carries a sense of psychological certainty. The mind knows how that pattern works. It understands the emotional terrain, the reactions, the expectations. And because the subconscious prioritizes familiarity over possibility, it often steers behavior toward outcomes that match existing beliefs. This is why someone raised with scarcity beliefs may unconsciously reject financial expansion. Opportunities that require a new level of confidence, responsibility, or visibility may trigger subtle discomfort. Without realizing it, the person may delay decisions, overanalyze possibilities, or find reasons why the opportunity might not work. From the outside, it looks like hesitation. From the inside, it is the subconscious maintaining internal consistency. The mind is trying to keep reality aligned with what it already believes to be true. This process creates what psychologists often call confirmation loops. The subconscious encourages actions and perceptions that validate the existing belief system. And when the outcome appears, it feels like proof that the belief was correct all along. But here is the deeper question. Are the patterns repeating in your life truly reflections of reality, or reflections of what your subconscious has learned to expect? What if your mind operates less like a judge deciding what is possible, and more like a garden growing whatever you plant most often? This metaphor may sound simple, but it reveals one of the most powerful principles governing the subconscious mind. Imagine a vast field of fertile soil. The soil itself does not evaluate the quality of the seeds you place into it. It does not debate whether the seed represents something beneficial or harmful. Its role is simply to nurture and grow whatever has been planted. Your subconscious functions in a remarkably similar way. Every thought you repeat, every emotional reaction you rehearse, every expectation you mentally return to, these are seeds entering the soil of the subconscious. And just like in a garden, repetition determines growth. A seed planted once may fade away, but a seed planted daily, with attention and emotional energy, gradually develops roots. Over time, these internal seeds grow into patterns of perception, habits of reaction, and decisions that shape your external life. If someone repeatedly plants thoughts of limitation, things never work out for me, I'm not ready yet, opportunities are scarce, those seeds quietly develop into beliefs that guide behavior. The individual may begin to overlook possibilities, hesitate at critical moments, or assume failure before an opportunity has even begun. But the same soil can grow entirely different outcomes. Seeds of confidence, expectancy, and possibility, when planted with consistency, can gradually transform the internal landscape of the mind. So the question becomes unavoidable. If your subconscious garden is already growing something, what kind of seeds have you been planting there every day without noticing? If the subconscious mind faithfully grows whatever is planted within it, why do so many people try to plant success while constantly watering doubt? This is one of the most common contradictions in human behavior. A person may repeat positive affirmations for a few minutes each day, declaring prosperity, confidence, or opportunity. But during the remaining hours, their internal dialogue returns to worry, frustration, and uncertainty. Thoughts like, "This is probably too good to be true," or "people like me rarely succeed," quietly take over. And the subconscious is always listening. Remember the principle we explored earlier. The subconscious accepts the dominant idea. Not the idea you briefly repeat when you feel motivated, but the idea that occupies the majority of your mental and emotional space. If your mind spends most of the day rehearsing fear, scarcity, or self-doubt, those patterns become the dominant signal. The subconscious begins organizing perception and behavior to maintain consistency with that signal. This is why occasional positivity often produces little change. It is like planting a healthy seed in the soil and then repeatedly digging it up to check whether it has started growing. The subconscious does not respond to short bursts of enthusiasm. It responds to consistent emotional patterns. When a belief is repeated often enough, especially with emotional intensity, it gradually becomes the internal standard through which reality is interpreted. And once that standard is established, the mind naturally begins noticing evidence that confirms it. So here is a powerful question to reflect on. During an average day, which signal truly dominates your inner world, possibility or doubt? Because whatever becomes dominant eventually becomes familiar, and whatever becomes familiar begins to shape your reality. Have you ever noticed how certain phrases slip out of your mouth so naturally that you hardly even hear them anymore? "I can't afford that." That's just not for people like me. "I'm terrible with money." "Nothing ever works out the way I want." These expressions often sound harmless, even realistic. Many people treat them as simple descriptions of current circumstances. But when you understand how the subconscious mind operates, you begin to see that these statements are far more powerful than they appear. Words are not just reflections of reality. They are instructions to the mind. Every time you repeat a phrase with conviction, your subconscious records it as a statement of identity or expectation. Over time, these repeated declarations begin to form the framework through which your mind interprets possibilities and opportunities. If someone constantly says, "I can't afford this," the subconscious begins reinforcing the identity of someone who lacks resources. That internal identity influences attention, decisions, and emotional reactions. Opportunities may be dismissed quickly. Creative solutions may not even enter awareness. The mind simply stays consistent with the instruction it has received. And because this process unfolds gradually, it often goes unnoticed. The person believes they are merely describing reality, when in fact they are reinforcing the pattern that keeps reality unchanged. This does not mean you must pretend circumstances are different from what they are. But it does mean that the language you repeatedly use becomes part of the subconscious programming shaping your future experiences. So here is a question that deserves careful attention. If your words are quietly training your subconscious, what kind of identity have your daily phrases been teaching your mind to accept? Have you ever wondered why some people feel uncomfortable around wealth, success, or powerful opportunities even when they consciously desire them? At first glance, it may seem like simple insecurity or lack of confidence. But often the deeper reason lies in a subtle internal conflict, one that most people never notice. Throughout life, many individuals absorb strong emotional messages about money, power, and success. They may hear phrases like, rich people are selfish, money corrupts people, or those who succeed must have done something dishonest. These ideas may appear casual in conversation, but when repeated often enough, especially in childhood, they become subconscious associations. Over time, the mind begins linking wealth with negativity. If success is subconsciously associated with greed, arrogance, or moral compromise, the mind quietly creates resistance to it. Even when the conscious mind says, I want financial abundance, another layer of the psyche may be signaling, but becoming wealthy means becoming someone I don't respect. And the subconscious always tries to protect internal consistency. So what happens? Opportunities may appear, but the individual hesitates. Growth becomes uncomfortable. Success feels strangely threatening. Without realizing it, the person may sabotage progress just enough to remain aligned with their deeper beliefs. From the outside, this can look like bad timing or unfortunate circumstances. But internally, it is often a form of psychological self-protection. The subconscious is not rejecting prosperity because it is impossible. It is rejecting it because it has been associated with something undesirable. So here is a question that reveals hidden layers of programming. When you imagine yourself becoming truly successful, does the image feel natural and empowering, or does it trigger a quiet sense of discomfort? Have you ever noticed how a single fear, repeated often enough, can begin to feel like a prediction rather than a possibility? Fear has a unique ability to concentrate attention. When the mind becomes preoccupied with a negative outcome, it starts rehearsing that scenario internally, again and again. The mind imagines what could go wrong, how the situation might unfold, and what the consequences would be. At first, this may seem like preparation or caution, but over time, something deeper begins to happen. The subconscious mind treats repeated emotional imagery as a form of instruction. Each time the mind revisits the feared scenario, the brain strengthens the neural pathway associated with that image. Gradually, the fear stops feeling hypothetical. It begins to feel familiar. And familiarity is something the subconscious tends to preserve. This is why persistent fear can quietly shape behavior. A person afraid of financial loss may become overly cautious, avoiding opportunities that require calculated risk. Someone afraid of rejection may hesitate to express ideas, approach new relationships, or pursue meaningful goals. The external world then reflects these restrained actions, creating outcomes that appear to confirm the original fear. The person may conclude, I knew this would happen. But what often occurred was not prediction, it was rehearsal. Fear repeatedly practiced an internal scenario until the mind began organizing behavior around avoiding or confirming it. And in doing so, the individual unknowingly helped create the very conditions they were trying to escape. So here is a powerful reflection. Is fear in your mind acting as a warning signal, or has it quietly become a script that your subconscious has been rehearsing for too long? Have you ever experienced a moment when the harder you tried to solve a problem, the more impossible the solution seemed to become? You think about it constantly. You analyze every possible angle. You replay conversations, calculate outcomes, and push your mind to find the answer. And yet, instead of clarity, what emerges is tension. The mind becomes tighter, not freer. The solution feels farther away, not closer. Why does this happen? Because excessive mental effort often creates resistance within the very system that produces insight. When the conscious mind becomes overly forceful, it floods the brain with pressure and urgency. This activates the stress response, narrowing perception and reducing cognitive flexibility. In simple terms, the mind becomes so focused on controlling the outcome that it blocks the natural creative processes of the subconscious. The subconscious mind, however, operates very differently. It thrives in states of relaxation, openness, and mental spaciousness. It connects patterns, associations, and possibilities that the analytical mind alone cannot detect. This is why so many breakthroughs appear when people stop trying so hard during a walk, a shower, a quiet moment before sleep. The solution was not created in that moment. It was allowed. When the conscious mind releases its tight grip, the subconscious finally has room to assemble ideas that were already forming beneath the surface. This principle reveals something profound. Sometimes the most productive action is not forcing the answer, but creating the internal conditions where insight can emerge. So here is a question worth reflecting on. Are you trying to control every step of the solution, or are you giving your mind the space it needs to discover it? Why do so many powerful ideas appear when the mind is calm, but disappear the moment pressure returns? Think about how often inspiration arrives in quiet moments. You might be walking without a specific destination, standing under the warm water of a shower, or lying in bed just before sleep. Suddenly, a solution becomes clear. A new idea forms effortlessly. A perspective that felt impossible a few hours earlier now seems obvious. This is not coincidence. It is the natural rhythm of how the conscious and subconscious minds interact. The conscious mind is analytical, deliberate, and structured. It focuses on logic, planning, and problem-solving through effort. But the subconscious mind works differently. It connects patterns, memories, experiences, and possibilities across vast networks of information that the conscious mind cannot process simultaneously. When the mind relaxes, these deeper networks become more accessible. In states of calm attention, when the brain shifts away from stress and urgency, the subconscious begins offering insights that were previously hidden beneath mental noise. This is why creativity, intuition, and clarity often appear when we step away from the problem instead of pushing harder against it. Relaxation is not the absence of thinking. It is the environment where deeper thinking becomes possible. And this reveals a powerful lesson. The mind is not only productive when it is working hard. It is also productive when it is receptive. By allowing moments of mental quiet, you give the subconscious the opportunity to reorganize information, reveal connections, and propose solutions that logic alone could not reach. So consider this carefully. When you face a difficult challenge, do you instinctively tighten your mental grip, or do you create the calm internal space where the deeper intelligence of your mind can finally speak? What if one of the most powerful moments to influence your subconscious mind happens every single day, just before you fall asleep? Most people treat the transition into sleep as a passive moment, something that simply happens when the body becomes tired. But from the perspective of mental programming, this period is incredibly significant. As the brain moves from the active rhythms of waking consciousness into the slower waves of relaxation, the barrier between the conscious and subconscious mind becomes much more permeable. In other words, the subconscious becomes more receptive. Throughout the day, The analytical mind constantly evaluates, questions, and filters incoming ideas. It acts as a kind of mental gatekeeper. But as you prepare for sleep, that gate begins to soften. The mind shifts into a state where suggestions, images, and emotions can reach the deeper layers of the psyche with far less resistance. This is why the final mental images you carry before sleep can have such a powerful influence. If the mind drifts into worry, replaying fears, regrets, or frustrations from the day, those emotional impressions become the last instructions delivered to the subconscious. And because sleep is a period of deep mental processing, those instructions may continue circulating beneath awareness throughout the night. But the same moment can also become a powerful tool for transformation. When someone intentionally introduces calm, positive imagery, visualizing a desired outcome as if it were already real, the subconscious begins receiving a new set of signals. And over time, these signals accumulate. So tonight, before you fall asleep, ask yourself something quietly important. What images will you allow to enter the deepest level of your mind? If the moments before sleep are so powerful for influencing the subconscious, how can you use them intentionally to reshape your internal programming? The key lies in something remarkably simple, yet often overlooked: visualization. Visualization is not merely daydreaming. It is the deliberate creation of mental scenes that the subconscious interprets as meaningful experiences. When you imagine an event vividly enough, especially from a first-person perspective, your brain begins activating many of the same neural pathways that would be engaged if the event were happening in real life. This is why athletes, performers, and high-level professionals often use visualization as part of their preparation. The mind rehearses the experience internally, creating familiarity before the external event ever occurs. But the subconscious responds most strongly when three elements are present. First, the visualization should be experienced from a first-person perspective. Instead of seeing yourself from the outside, imagine looking through your own eyes as if the desired reality is unfolding around you. Second, involve physical sensations. Notice the environment, the movements of your body, the sounds, textures, and details of the moment. These sensory impressions make the mental scene more convincing to the subconscious. Third, allow genuine emotion to emerge. Feel the satisfaction, relief, gratitude, or excitement associated with the outcome you desire. Emotion acts like a form of energy that deepens the subconscious imprint. Over time, these repeated internal experiences begin reshaping expectations and behavior. So, before sleep tonight, consider asking yourself this: if your mind is capable of rehearsing fear so vividly, what might happen if you began rehearsing your desired future with the same clarity and emotional intensity? Why does emotion make such a profound difference in the way the subconscious mind absorbs an idea? You can repeat a sentence 100 times with little effect if it carries no emotional weight. But a single moment filled with intense feeling, joy, fear, excitement, humiliation, can imprint itself in memory for years. This is not accidental. Emotion acts as a kind of amplifier within the mind, signaling to the brain that a particular experience is important and should be stored deeply. The subconscious mind responds to that signal. When emotion accompanies a thought or mental image, the brain releases chemical messengers that strengthen neural connections associated with that experience. In simple terms, emotion tells the mind, "This matters. Remember it." Over time, these emotionally reinforced patterns become the dominant programs guiding perception and behavior. This is why fearful experiences in childhood can shape beliefs for decades. The emotional intensity, locks the memory into the subconscious as a reference point for interpreting future situations. But the same mechanism can also be used intentionally. When visualization is paired with genuine emotion, gratitude, excitement, relief, confidence, the subconscious begins to treat the imagined experience as something significant. The internal rehearsal becomes more than a simple thought. It becomes a felt reality that the mind starts organizing around. This is why emotion is often described as the fuel of subconscious programming. Without emotion, thoughts remain surface level. With emotion, they penetrate deeper layers of the mind. So here is a question worth reflecting on. When you think about the future you desire, do you simply describe it intellectually, or do you allow yourself to feel it as if it were already unfolding within your life? If emotion strengthens the imprint of an idea in the subconscious, why is repetition still necessary? Because the subconscious mind is not programmed by a single moment of enthusiasm. It is programmed by patterns. Think about how habits form. A behavior repeated once rarely changes anything. But when the same action is performed again and again, day after day, it gradually becomes automatic. The brain strengthens the neural pathways associated with that behavior until it begins to feel natural, even effortless. The same process applies to thoughts and beliefs. Every time you repeat a mental image or emotional expectation, you reinforce the neural network connected to it. Over time, that network becomes the path of least resistance in your mind. Thoughts following that pathway begin appearing more frequently, reactions become predictable, and behavior subtly aligns with the belief that has been repeated the most. This is why deeply rooted beliefs rarely change overnight. They were built through years of repetition. Thousands of small moments where a similar thought or emotional response was practiced again and again. And because of this, replacing an old pattern requires consistent reinforcement of a new one. Not forced optimism, but deliberate repetition of a new internal narrative. When someone repeatedly visualizes a desired outcome, feels the associated emotion, and returns to that mental rehearsal regularly, the subconscious gradually begins to accept the new pattern as familiar. And familiarity is powerful. What once felt unrealistic begins to feel possible. What once felt distant begins to feel expected. So here is a question to consider carefully. If repetition has been shaping your subconscious for years, what pattern are you reinforcing every day without even noticing it? Why do so many people sabotage their own mental creation right after they begin imagining something better? Imagine someone visualizing a future filled with success, stability, or fulfillment. For a few moments, the image feels vivid and inspiring. The person can almost feel the experience, as if it were already unfolding. But then, almost immediately, another thought appears. But how would that even happen? Or perhaps, that seems unrealistic. And just like that, the mind shifts from creation to doubt. This reaction is incredibly common, and it reveals an important dynamic between the conscious and subconscious mind. The conscious mind is trained to analyze, evaluate, and question. It constantly seeks logical explanations and predictable pathways. When a new possibility appears that does not fit the existing mental map, the conscious mind often reacts with skepticism. But the subconscious does not operate through analytical logic. It responds to the emotional clarity and repetition of internal images. When you introduce a new possibility through visualization, the subconscious begins registering that signal. But if the conscious mind immediately interrupts with doubt, it sends a contradictory instruction. One signal says, "This is my future." The other says, this cannot happen. And the subconscious struggles to act on mixed instructions. This is why the process of visualization includes an often overlooked step, releasing control over the exact mechanism. The moment you begin obsessing over how the outcome will occur, you shift your attention back to limitation. So consider this carefully. When you imagine the future you desire, do you allow the image to exist with confidence, or do you immediately begin arguing with it? What if the path toward your desired future already exists, but your mind simply cannot see it yet? One of the greatest limitations of the conscious mind is its dependence on known information. It builds expectations based on past experiences, familiar strategies, and logical projections. If the mind cannot immediately identify a clear pathway from where you are to where you want to be, it often concludes that the outcome is unlikely. But this assumption is based on a very narrow perspective. Your conscious mind only has access to a fraction of the information influencing your life at any given moment. It cannot anticipate every conversation, opportunity, coincidence, or chain of events that might unfold in the future. In contrast, the subconscious mind operates across a much wider network of associations and patterns. When a clear internal intention becomes established, through repeated visualization, emotional engagement, and consistent belief, the subconscious begins subtly adjusting your perception and behavior. You may notice new ideas appearing unexpectedly. You may feel drawn toward conversations or environments you would previously have ignored. You may recognize opportunities that once seemed invisible. From the outside, these events often look like coincidence or luck. But in many cases, they are the natural result of a mind that has aligned its attention with a new possibility. The subconscious begins scanning the environment for patterns that match the internal image it has accepted. This does not mean the path will appear instantly, but it does mean that possibilities often emerge through channels the conscious mind could never have predicted. So here is a powerful question to reflect on. If your current logic cannot see the path forward, are you willing to trust that a deeper level of your mind may already be searching for it? Why do so many people begin the process of inner transformation only to abandon it just before the change begins to take root? At the beginning, motivation is often strong. A new idea appears. A powerful realization shifts perspective. The person starts visualizing a different future, repeating new thoughts, and questioning old beliefs. For a few days, or sometimes a few weeks, the internal atmosphere begins to feel different. But then something subtle happens. Reality does not change immediately. The external world still reflects many of the patterns created by past thoughts, past emotions, and past decisions. Bills still arrive. Old situations still appear. Familiar challenges continue to unfold. And because these external conditions remain visible, the mind may begin to doubt the internal work that has just begun. Maybe this isn't working. Maybe nothing is really changing. This moment is critical because subconscious reprogramming does not operate like a light switch. It functions more like the gradual turning of a large ship. Even when the captain changes direction, the vessel continues moving along the previous path for a while before the new course becomes visible. During this period, consistency becomes the decisive factor. Every repeated visualization, every aligned thought, every moment of emotional certainty reinforces the new internal pattern. Slowly, the subconscious begins replacing older programs with the new ones being introduced. But if the practice stops too early, the old pattern simply regains control. So here is an important question to ask yourself. When reality appears unchanged for a while, will you assume the process has failed, Or will you understand that the deeper layers of your mind may still be turning the wheel? What if the greatest obstacle to changing your life is not the external world, but your own impatience with the process of transformation? Modern culture has trained us to expect immediate results. We press a button and receive an answer. We order something online and expect it to arrive within hours. This conditioning quietly shapes the way many people approach inner change as well. They try a new mental practice for a few days and expect their circumstances to transform instantly. But the subconscious mind does not operate according to the speed of modern technology. It operates according to the rhythm of repetition, emotional reinforcement, and gradual neurological change. When a belief has been repeated for years, sometimes decades, it becomes deeply embedded within the subconscious. That belief has influenced countless decisions, reactions, and expectations over time. It has shaped habits of thought that feel automatic. Replacing such a pattern requires patience. Each new visualization, each repeated emotional rehearsal, each conscious redirection of thought is like planting and nurturing a new seed. At first, nothing appears to happen on the surface. Beneath the soil, however, the structure of the plant is forming. Roots are developing. The same principle applies to the mind. New neural pathways begin forming through repetition. The subconscious gradually becomes familiar with the different internal narrative. Expectations begin to shift. Behavior follows. And eventually, external circumstances begin reflecting the internal transformation. But the visible result often appears only after the internal foundation has matured. So consider this carefully. Are you willing to allow the invisible phase of change to unfold, or do you expect the outer world to transform before the inner work has fully taken hold? If the subconscious mind is constantly shaping your reactions and decisions, how can you tell whether it is operating through an old program or a new one? One of the clearest indicators is your automatic emotional response to situations. When an unexpected opportunity appears, perhaps a new project, a financial possibility, or a meaningful relationship, notice the very first internal reaction. Does the mind immediately open with curiosity and possibility? Or does it quietly contract with hesitation and doubt? These initial reactions often emerge before conscious reasoning even begins. That is because they are produced by the subconscious mind, which operates through stored expectations and emotional associations. The subconscious constantly scans incoming situations and compares them with existing patterns. If something matches a familiar belief, the mind responds quickly and comfortably. But when something challenges an old program, resistance may appear almost instantly. For example, a person who has long believed that success is difficult may instinctively feel overwhelmed when a large opportunity arises. The reaction may not be logical. It may simply feel uncomfortable. This discomfort is not proof that the opportunity is wrong. Often, it is simply the subconscious encountering something that does not match its current programming. And this is where awareness becomes powerful. Instead of automatically following the old emotional signal, you can pause and observe it. Ask yourself whether this reaction belongs to your present intention or to an outdated belief system that is still operating in the background. Because transformation rarely begins with external change. It begins with noticing the invisible programs guiding your internal responses. What if the real transformation does not begin when your circumstances change, but when your identity quietly begins to shift? Many people approach change by trying to modify their external situation first. They attempt to earn more money, attract different relationships, or create new opportunities while still carrying the same internal identity that shaped their current reality. But the subconscious mind organizes behavior according to identity. If someone internally identifies as a person who struggles financially, their decisions will often reflect caution, limitation, or hesitation around opportunity. Even when they consciously desire prosperity, the deeper identity remains the reference point guiding behavior. In other words, the subconscious always asks a silent question: what kind of person am I? Once that identity becomes established, the mind begins reinforcing actions that keep reality consistent with it. This is why lasting change often requires more than new strategies. It requires the gradual emergence of a different self-concept. When someone repeatedly visualizes themselves living with confidence, stability, creativity, or abundance, and allows the associated emotions to become familiar, the subconscious begins adjusting its internal reference point. Over time, the individual no longer feels like someone trying to achieve a new reality. They begin feeling like someone for whom that reality is natural. And when identity shifts, behavior follows. Decisions become different. Opportunities are approached differently. Risks are evaluated differently. The individual begins acting from a new internal baseline. This is the quiet moment where transformation truly begins. So ask yourself honestly, when you imagine your desired future, are you only changing the circumstances, or are you also allowing your identity to evolve into the person who naturally lives that reality? What if the reality you experience every day is not only responding to what you want, but to who you consistently believe you are? This question touches the very core of subconscious programming, because beneath every goal, every desire, and every plan lies something even more influential: self-image. Your self-image is the internal portrait you carry about yourself, often without realizing it. It includes what you believe you deserve, what you think you are capable of, and what kind of life feels normal for someone like you. And once this internal portrait is established, the subconscious begins organizing behavior and perception around maintaining it. For example, if someone sees themselves as a person who always struggles financially, they may work hard and pursue opportunities, yet still feel uncomfortable when abundance begins to appear. That discomfort can trigger subtle forms of self-correction, delaying decisions, avoiding visibility, or choosing safer but limiting paths. The subconscious is not trying to sabotage success. It is trying to maintain identity consistency. In the same way a thermostat regulates temperature, the subconscious often regulates life circumstances to stay within the boundaries of the self-image it has accepted. When reality begins moving beyond that internal setting, the mind instinctively attempts to bring things back into familiar territory. This is why genuine transformation requires more than external effort. It requires expanding the internal image of who you believe you are allowed to become. Because once the self-image evolves, the subconscious stops resisting the new reality. Instead, it begins supporting it. So consider this carefully. If your life is quietly orbiting around your current self-image, what new version of yourself are you willing to accept as real? What if the most important shift in your life does not begin with a new opportunity, but with a new level of responsibility for the way your mind participates in reality? Many people spend years waiting for external change. They wait for better circumstances, better timing, better support, or better luck. They assume that when the world around them improves, their thoughts, emotions, and confidence will finally follow. But the deeper principle we have explored throughout this journey suggests the opposite. External change often follows internal alignment. Your thoughts, Emotions, mental images, and repeated expectations are not passive reactions to life. They are signals, constant instructions shaping how your subconscious organizes perception, behavior, and decision-making. Over time, these internal signals influence the patterns that appear in your external experience. This realization can feel uncomfortable at first, because it removes the comforting illusion that life is entirely outside your control. But it also introduces something far more powerful: authorship. When you begin observing your internal dialogue, choosing your mental imagery with intention, and rehearsing new emotional states through visualization and repetition, you are no longer living only by inherited programming. You are participating consciously in the process of shaping your future. This does not mean you control every event in life, but it does mean you influence the direction of your internal signal, and that signal affects how reality unfolds through your actions, perceptions, and opportunities. So here is the final question to carry with you. Now that you understand how deeply your subconscious participates in creating your experience, what kind of reality will you begin practicing from within, starting today? Before you go, make sure to subscribe to the channel and follow for more insights on the hidden mechanisms shaping your reality. If this message resonated with you, like the video so it can reach others who are ready for this knowledge. And feel free to share it with someone who may need to hear this today.